Good morning. I'm Glenn Vanderburg. I work at Living Social. I lead the internal applications engineering team there. I want to just mention to start off, I accepted the invitation to do this keynote and selected my talk topic before I knew we were going to come here and try to recruit people and do a big sponsor party and everything. So I apologize if the theme of the talk fitting in with all of that makes me look like a sleazy corporate tool. For the record, I'm not sleazy, and we are hiring. So I have been working from home since December of 2005, over 8 years now. And during that time, I've mostly really enjoyed it. But I got to be honest, there have been times when it wasn't so great. And it was something that I had to learn to be good at. I had to learn how to do it well. And it's kind of a skill, and it takes practice, and it takes focus to learn how to be an effective remote software developer. Similarly, I joined Living Social about 3 years ago when Living Social bought the company InfoEther that I worked for at the time. And before they bought us, Living Social's engineering team looked like this. There was almost everybody in DC and one QA guy in Oklahoma City. And one of the reasons that they bought us was that we were a distributed team. And they were recruiting people in DC, and there are a lot of programmers in DC, but they don't all have, the right skill set for a web e-commerce startup. It's mostly sort of military and government skill set. And so they wanted to learn from us how to become a distributed team. And instantly, on the day they bought us, the engineering team looked like that. And continued to grow, and we continued to hire. And today, and I'm sure I missed some things here, but from what I know of, our engineering team looks like this. And, but just like I had to learn to be an effective remote software engineer, Living Social had to learn how to effectively have and support and benefit from a distributed development team. And so that's another thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about what remote developers need to do to be effective in a distributed team. And I also want to talk about what companies need to do to make effective use of a distributed team and have that work well. Having a distributed engineering team has a lot of benefits. Benefits for the company include, and this is not a complete list, there's a larger pool of employees. I think you end up with, in general, happier, more productive employees. There's a fairly obvious benefit of reduced facilities costs. People are working out of their homes. You don't have to pay rent and utilities and furniture costs for, to support them in your office. There are also benefits for the individual remote workers. Obvious one, there's no commute. You have a flexible schedule. You can, take off for a few minutes and greet your kids when they come home from school and things like that. Pants are optional, things like that. But, I'm a person who doesn't think it's helpful to hide ugly truths, right, or harsh truths. It's always better to face them square on and understand what they are so that you can deal with them properly. And I want to talk about a kind of harsh truth. And that truth is that at the core of an employer-employee relationship is kind of a cold financial transaction that's going on, right? You're trading your time and skills and effort for money. And you don't want to work for a company that focuses on that cold, impersonal economic transaction as a part of when they think about you as their employee. But my philosophy as an employee has always been that I want to focus on that so that my company doesn't have to. I haven't always been great at that, but when I have, it's worked really well. I focus on, wow, I'm getting all this money, I'm getting all these benefits. I need to make sure I'm giving enough value that they never question whether that transaction is worth it for them. And that's really helpful in building an effective relationship between you and your employer. And so, that said, I think it's important to notice that remote work and distributed engineering teams also have costs in addition to the benefits. Communication is often less efficient. Meetings are harder, not just because you have to have local people and remote people all in and communicating effectively, but also because time zones become an issue. And in some cases where you need certain people involved in the meeting, there's a smaller window of time when you can do that because of time zone overlap. In working with remote employees working with a team that's co-located, you have to use technology, and there are always, it seems, technical difficulties, flaky Wi-Fi, dropped connections, Google Hangout persisting in muting you while you're talking, all those kinds of things. And those are the downsides, mostly downsides for the company, but there are downsides for employees as well. You get lonely. You can kind of get lonely and stir crazy if you're not careful, if you don't manage your time well and make sure you get out and have enough human contact. If you don't work to be visible in your organization, you can be kind of invisible. And if you're doing good work, you don't want to be invisible in your company, right? You want people to notice you. You want people to think of you for things that they need doing and everything like that. This kind of comes under technical difficulties, but it warrants mention of its own. Polycom conference room phones are a downside. I think the microphones are designed to primarily pick up fingers drumming on the table and keyboard clacking and rustling of chip bags and things. So there are lots of benefits, and there's a lot of reasons we want to do this, but it also has costs. And a big part of being an effective distributed engineering team involves being aware of these costs and working to minimize or mitigate them or deal with them effectively. And one other point I want to make is that to some of the people at the office every day, the people who go into the office, maybe they're not involved in recruiting of engineers. For whatever reason, they're co-located with the team and they go to the office every day and they have to deal with all this remote people. Sometimes it might seem to them that most of the benefits of having a distributed team are all for the remote workers and they pay all the costs. Does that make sense? I've never had the guts to actually say I'd like a remote job that's high-paying and has goals which can't be measured. So what does it take from both sides to make a distributed team work well? I'm going to talk first about what it takes from the remote developer. And I am going to talk a little later about what it takes from the people who are in the office every day and from the company as a whole. And I want to apologize. I intended to spend yesterday finding cool illustrations for these slides, but I spent it writing a remembrance of Jim Weirich instead. So I hope you'll forgive me for that shift of priorities. The first thing I want to say is fairly obvious. Be visible. Make sure people see the work you do. Be available in meetings. Speak up in meetings. It's very tempting when you're sitting on the end of a phone line in a big meeting. The people who are there in the room together, and we'll talk more about that later, the people who are there in the room together can talk and interrupt each other, and they have all kinds of visible feedback, and it's easier for them to talk and dominate the conversation. But, pay attention and be visible. People need to know you're there, and if you're not walking around the office every day, it's kind of easy to forget. You need to be visible by making your work visible. You need to be visible in meetings, on conference calls. Use video whenever you can. If you have to ask somebody a question, you can do it via instant message or chat or something like that. And for short little things, that works great, and it's probably preferable to a larger interruption. But if you have to go as far as calling somebody, go ahead and make it a hangout. Talk to each other face to face. If you're going to interrupt and have a synchronous conversation, get the visibility out of it. It's worthwhile. Also, be visible with your calendar. Most teams of any size have some sort of distributed calendar system now where people can schedule meetings automatically. And for developers that maybe only have a couple meetings a week, for me it's now second nature. Kind of sadly, but for developers who maybe only have a meeting or two a week, you tend not to live by your calendar. But it makes it so much easier for everybody else if you do. And like if you have to take off to go to a school conference for your kid or a doctor's appointment or something like that, put that on your calendar so that your time, your available time, or when you don't have time, is visible to the people you work with. And it helps with planning and it helps reduce friction. In addition to being visible, be yourself. We use Campfire for team chat rooms all over the place at Living Social, and we have a room called Off Topic. And I really wanted to go back in the transcripts and find a good example of some of the stuff that goes on in our Off Topic room. And there are people who really do a great job as remote employees of being active there and doing things that are silly, funny, not work-related, not productive, but they let people in the company who don't work with them every day, who've never met them in person sometimes, get to know their personalities. It probably won't surprise you from seeing Chris Morris talk yesterday that everybody in the Living Social Engineering team, even those who've never met him face to face, feel like they know him because his personality comes through in his writing and the jokes he puts in off topic, and he's active there. Greg Vaughn is another one of those who understands that you kind of need that water cooler time, even if you don't have a shared water cooler or corporate kitchen to go to. You have to find your own balance with this. I'm sure everybody at Living Social has had times when they feel like, oh man, I just wasted 2 hours because I got sucked into that interesting conversation and off topic or whatever. But it really is part of your job. It might not seem like it, but if you were at an office in a co-located team and there was a group having fun discussing what they did this weekend or a movie they watched or something like that nearby, a lot of the time you would go over and join in because it's a sociable, personal thing to do, and you need to get to know your teammates. And as a remote worker, that kind of thing in chat is a really great idea. Ben talked yesterday about what GitHub calls chat ops, using Hubot to do a lot of their operational things. And I didn't understand why they did it that way and what was important about it for a while, but I came to understand that one of the benefits of it is that it forces people, it sort of makes it the path of least resistance to be in group chat all the time, because not only are there people there you can communicate with, but you get real work done there. And you can diagnose problems and monitor systems and deploy, and those things as well. So it kind of helps, I think, and when I'd love to hear, whether I'm right about that or not, but I think it helps to push people into those group chat rooms. And Wynn blogged just a couple of weeks ago about the importance of something as silly as using emoji in your written communications in a distributed team, just as a way to express emotion and get an extra bit of bandwidth, I guess, in your written communication, and let your personality show through, because people need to know more about you than just your work. All that said, of course, you also need to be disciplined. Believe me, it's super easy to, kind of let your schedule drift. I used to work with a guy years ago who he worked. And this wasn't laziness. This was because he was a workaholic, and he worked about a 25-and-a-half-hour day. I mean, not work, but work plus eating plus sleeping ended up being about 25-and-a-half hours, and he would kind of, over the period of a month, drift out of phase with everyone else in the office. So he was mostly working at night, and then, we'd start seeing him early in the mornings again, and he'd drift back in phase with us. So discipline is not just about don't be lazy. It's also about, when you're working, manage it so that it's most effective with the rest of the team. Part of remote work is flexibility, and that's great. But you kind of buy yourself the ability to take advantage of that flexibility by being disciplined when you can and when you don't need that flexibility. Be disciplined about your workspace, too. I had a conversation with some guys last night about how, if you try working from home for a day or two, it might not work out too well, not only because you haven't learned the skills and gotten into the right habits, but also because you might not have set up a dedicated workspace at your house where you can get there and focus and be free from distractions and kind of have that little psychological trigger when you sit down in the chair of, I'm at work now. And so, again, the same recipe doesn't work for everybody. You have to find the thing that works for you, but discipline is important. Be available. This is one of the trade-offs. You get a lot of benefits from being able to work at home or work in a satellite office or something like that. What remote workers often find, though, is that their life and their work blend a little more. Because you're working at home, your home life and family life sometimes intrudes into your work hours, which is okay. I use the word intrude like it's a bad thing, but it's not. That's part of what you want from that. I saw a blog post a couple of weeks ago where a guy recommended, if you work from home, block off 30 minutes right around the time your kids get home from school on your calendar every day. Best case, you're not busy and you get to greet them and ask them about their day, which, it can be informative before they get to be about 12 or 13 and stop telling you about what went on during their day. And you get to greet them and take a little bit of time off, and you're not just tied to your work right there when they get home from school. Worst case, something happens, you need to go get them. You don't have to cancel a meeting or anything like that. So your home life bleeds over into your working hours, and that's great. That's kind of what you want. In return, we often find that sometimes our work life bleeds over into what we would usually think of as non-working hours. I found it much easier to be an on-call programmer once I started working from home, because it didn't seem like such a big imposition. It fit right into my regular routines. When I went to the office every day, then when I was called in the evening or wee hours of the morning to fix a production issue or something like that, A, it was really unusual, and B, I was I now had to do things in a different way than I usually did. I had to, remember how to dial into the VPN or stuff like that, which I didn't usually need to do because I was at the office. Once I started working from home, it became a fairly natural thing for, it's 11:30 at night and there's a production issue. I go in and sit down and work at it just as if it were 9 o'clock in the morning and there were a production issue. You don't want the company to have a claim on your hours every hour of every day, but be available when you can. It's kind of a good thing, I think, within reason. It's been good for me to have my work and family life blend together a bit. Be flexible. Remote work gives you a lot of flexibility, and part of that trade-off is being flexible in return. This kind of summarizes some of the other things I've mentioned. But it also points to the last thing. I've talked so far mostly about things you can do to minimize the costs of being a remote employee. But I also want to talk about maximizing the benefit. Be free. We have an employee right now who, I met him last week for the first time. We were at an all-hands meeting in D.C., and I'd never met him before, and I said, "So where do you live?" And he said, "No place, I'm homeless. My wife and I have been, in an RV traveling around the country for a couple of months. We're trying to decide, we gave up our old place to live, and we're trying to decide where we're going to settle down. We're kind of in Phoenix right now, and he's taking advantage of the freedom of not having to be in the office every day, and he, takes care to still get his work done, and he works on the road and finds places where he can do that. And we've had several employees who've done things like that. One guy who isn't a remote worker, he works in an office in Boulder. He's originally from Germany, and he had to, he wanted to go home and be there for some family things in Germany for a while, and he went to his boss and said, "Hey, can I do that?" And well, sure. We've got people who work remotely all the time, so that shouldn't be a problem. Take advantage of the freedom that remote work can give you, within reason, or otherwise, why are you doing it? We have several employees who have moved to places where they've always wanted to live but never been able to because their job took them somewhere else. But now that they work on an effective distributed team, they were able to move to where they and their family wanted to be, or back home closer to family or something like that. One of the reasons that you need to focus and work hard to minimize the costs of remote work is so that then you can then also happily enjoy the freedom that it provides. So those are the tips for the remote developer. But I said right at the start that the organization that wants to have a distributed engineering team has some learning to do as well. And I also want to talk about the tips for everyone else. And the first thing I want to say very loudly and clearly is use video. If you're not a remote developer who sits in a room alone with a headset on, joining meetings or having conversations with people, you probably don't understand just how valuable even really crappy video is. I mentioned earlier Polycom conference phones and how terrible they are, but their value is magnified enormously if you have a little webcam or a laptop that's nobody's using for something else in the conference room on the other end with, even 6 to 8 frames per second video showing you. Just being able to see who's in the room, how they're facing each other, who's talking, makes it easier to follow the meeting. It makes it easier to stay engaged. It makes it easier to hear the crappy audio if you have some video feedback to go with that. It's it's the path of least resistance if you're an employee in the office and you have to bring in a remote developer or something like that. It's the path of least resistance to just dial them in on the phone and start your meeting. But if you take a little bit of extra trouble to bring some video into the equation, it helps enormously. And not just for the remote employee, it makes the meeting more effective and efficient and helps you get their feedback and input into the meeting, which is presumably why you invited them there in the first place. Also, work from home occasionally. The company choosing to have a distributed team makes it possible for people who would normally go to the office to work from home occasionally and try that out. And it's valuable just for understanding what the remote employee is doing and how you can help them. We kind of struggled at Living Social for a while with building a distributed engineering culture, but one of the breakthroughs happened when one of our DC-based engineers said, okay, what can I do? How can I help? Help me understand this. I think I can get the message across since I'm one of the DC people. And he asked questions, and we talked to him about it. And one of the things we told him was, the importance of video. And we also told him, we wish people in DC would, just once stay home and call into a meeting or dial into one of our all-hands meetings or something like that and understand what it's like. And he started promoting work-from-home days in the DC office. And not everybody took advantage of it, but enough people did that it was kind of a sea change. And that, combined with the message of video, kind of led to a policy that still not everybody gets, but a lot of people do, of Hangouts first, which is to say, if you're having a meeting and there are 3 of you that sit within 10 feet of each other and one guy over in Portland, don't the 3 of you go find a conference room to have the meeting and dial in the remote person. Instead, all of you sit at your desks and join a Hangout so that you all have the same experience. And that has been huge. And most of even the business people that my team, or that I personally work with in the DC office, have learned this, that sitting at your desk and joining the Hangout, even if one of the other people in the same meeting is catty corner across from you in the workroom, is a better experience for everyone because everybody's on the same footing and they get to be included. Working from home occasionally helps you understand, but it also goes to the final point, is that people in the office need to also understand that having a distributed engineering team and an effective remote culture gives you freedom too. I mentioned the guy in Denver who wanted to go home and spend some time in Germany and do his work from there. And it was a non-issue for him. It really wasn't, nobody questioned it. He didn't have to have a big meeting and decide whether that was okay. And it's like, okay, you act like one of the remote people for a while, and that'll work out great. And it did. It's one of the benefits that accrues to everybody in a distributed team. But people who go to the office every day sort of get in the habit of thinking, okay, it's the people who are in other cities that work from home. I have to come to the office every day. And, for a lot of people, that's just what works. There are people who really don't want to work from their home or from a coffee shop or anything like that. They really enjoy the office environment and go there, and that's great. But remember that building a distributed culture has bought that freedom for you too, and occasionally you might find it useful to take advantage of it. So I have left some time for questions, and it was just out of curiosity, how many people in this room work from home now? Wow, about half of you. That's pretty good. I've I've left some times for questions, and this is when I get to try my big stunt and see if it works. I've invited, hey, there you go. I've invited 3 members of my team to join us and take questions. Let's see, I need to turn the volume up. Ouch. Somebody say hello quietly.
Hello.
Oh, hello, Sarah. So that's good. So this is Daniel Gregoire. He works on our email architecture team, and he lives in Charleston, South Carolina. And next up is, let me see if I can work this mouse from this weird angle. This is Nick Seeger. He is the tech lead on our email tools team, and he lives in Minneapolis in that cool hip bedroom that he works from. And this is Sarah Fleming, one of our front-end developers, and she is in Portland, and she's a joy to work with. And
Seattle.
Seattle, sorry. And I don't know why I said that. I'm turning around looking at them like they can see me looking at them. So I'm going to turn this around so that they can see you guys, and then click that again so that whoever's talking will get, hello. So,
awesome.
Does anybody have any questions? We've got some canned stuff if you don't, but I'd rather have questions from y'all. Right there. Do we do any persistent video hangout? Oh, okay. So the question was, do you do any kind of ongoing video hangouts just for like presence information, not an active video conference? Like, what was the name of that thing that was out for a while? Squiggle. So, were any of you? We tried Squiggle for a while. Were any of you on that team? I know Nick's team did, but that was before he was on it, I think.
Yeah, we've been talking about maybe having office hours or Squiggle hours.
Yeah.
Some hour or two during the week where everybody's just there and making goofy faces for the freeze frames and whatever, but so we can see each other.
It is valuable. I mentioned the value of video and even just ongoing presence video, and that kind of thing can be 2 frames per second and low resolution. It helps you know like what the other people are doing, and if is now a good time to interrupt? Well, probably not, since he's scowling at his screen like that and everything. It looks like he's really concentrating. I'll interrupt him later. It can be hugely helpful. Who else? There was somebody. Yeah. Okay, so any thoughts about how employees who want to build a better distributed culture, how we can encourage our company to do that? Anybody have any thoughts?
Well, one of the best opportunities is when you're trying to grow a team, and all of a sudden, if you can show the kind of talent that you can draw by, spreading the net a bit wider than just your geographic locale. I think that's one clear opportunity to show an employer, hey, look, you could get developers like these if you were willing to allow a more distributed team.
And that probably applies pretty well to Daniel's team. The team Daniel works on does most of their work in Clojure. That's still kind of a niche technology with not too many experienced developers available. And on that team, it's been really beneficial. None of that team, well, one guy who splits his time between Ruby and Clojure is in the DC office, and everybody else is remote. Somebody way back at the back, you have to yell. Oh, tips for remote tech leads and managers. That's great. I'll throw that to Nick in a minute. That reminds me of something I wanted to say, though, which is right now, you met Ryan yesterday, my boss. He's our VP of engineering. He has really 4 engineering directors underneath him. And I'm here in Dallas. Maria Gutierrez is in Edinburgh, Scotland. Steve Akers is in Louisville, Kentucky. And only one of them, Doug Ramsey, is actually in the DC office. So one of the things I think is I'm really proud of is that we've learned how to have some remote management. But all that said, I'll throw it to Nick for kind of being a tech lead on a team.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things you probably realize as you start to become a senior engineer or a tech lead is that your value to the team extends beyond your own contributions. So even if you're not necessarily directly managing people, which is my situation, it's really helpful to stay connected to the team, have conversations, do remote pairing, and spread your knowledge through this meeting that we've been talking about. I work on a team with actually 3 other engineers who are all part of the Hungry Academy effort that Living Social had a little over a year ago. And so they're at varying stages of their technical career. They come from different backgrounds. They're not necessarily brand new, but they certainly have different levels of experience and feel for what they should be doing. And so to be able to check in with them, to be able to screen share with them, remote pair, and just discuss things, even though we're not geographically next to each other, has been a real big help, and it's been a great learning experience for me as well.
Anybody else? Right there. Are you all wearing pants?
Yes.
Today.
Just for you guys.
And that's special for Sarah because it's early for her in Seattle. So.
A little bit.
Did you have anything? Did you want to say something? Okay. Who else? What tools do we use for pair programming?
We've been using a tool called Screen Hero.
Screen Hero?
Which is, I like it quite a bit. I mean, it's a whole screen sharing program. It's what I like about it is it combines the screen with audio, so you don't have to set up different channels for audio or conferencing and the screen sharing. And it seems like if you have decent enough bandwidth, the video quality on the screen share has been pretty good. We've also done SSH into a shared computer and use tmux or Screen or something like that in the past. That's worked pretty well. You run into the general problems with remote pairing where you and the other developer might not use the same tools on your own machines, but that's just one of those things where you have to learn from each other and be flexible.
And that's not a problem specific to a distributed team either.
No.
Yep.
In the last few weeks, we've also been trying, since we use Google Hangouts primarily as our video conferencing tool, a tool called Madi, which runs Node.js server and allows you to do editing of your code in the Google Hangout. It's like another app that you can add to the Hangout, and it uses the ACE web-based code editor, and so you can have Vim or Emacs bindings, but it live updates the code base on the originator's computer. So Madi has been a pretty interesting tool to try out the last few weeks.
We've also bought a number of our developers who asked for this iPads to kind of use to offload the video conference part of pair programming from their main computer, both for reasons of CPU and also for reasons of screen real estate. We do buy our remote developers nice monitors and things like that so that they're not always working on a laptop screen. But even then, it can be helpful to have an iPad sitting on a stand off to the side and get the video conferencing part of it out of the way a little bit, because when you're having a meeting and an active discussion, you want to look at each other face to face. But when you're pairing, it's mostly about the code, and your video conference is there just as an adjunct to that. So it helps to kind of move it off to the side sometimes. Mark. So the question is, do we have any suggestions about setting expectations for with your family, for your work hours and when you can and can't be disturbed and bleed over into your work time. Do any of you have comments on that, or is that going to be one for me?
I've dealt with that in the past. I think it worked best for me just doing something simple like having a door you can close, having the door open most of the time, but then having it closed if you're on a conference call or if you can't go away from the computer. I think going back to what Len was saying earlier about trying to block your own time off around hours where you know that you might have interactions with family, whether it's after school or before dinner, and just making sure that you're not tied to the computer at those times. I know some of the most trying times for me were when I had to be in front of the computer and my kids just walked in the door, and but they don't end up seeing me until an hour or two later. Mm-hmm. Then it's like, well, what is he doing? Does he care about us? Does he even know that we got home from school? So kind of you have to attack it from both sides.
Daniel, you look like you might want to say something. Yes? No? No. Okay.
It's a similar thing. I accomplish it by having my office on a different floor of the house than where my kids and wife are normally present. So that's the main goal. And
you don't have to be. Nick made a good point of yes, it's important to have a door, but leave it open when you can. Close it when you have to. I've met a lot of my employees' kids waving to them, in the back of a hangout, and several of them have met some of my kids the same way. And for certain kinds of meetings, that kind of interruption is just fine, and it's not a big deal. Don't sweat it. I've enjoyed seeing like Mark Rogelia's daughter running around in the background after she gets back from Taekwondo or something like that, and it's all fun. Yeah. So the question is, do we have an official remote work policy about bandwidth requirements, or do you have to be on at a certain time, like mandatory office hours? And the answer, as far as I'm aware, is no, we don't. It's like, make it work. We do, employees who want to can expense some of their bandwidth charges back to us, and we pay for those. Like I said, we provide monitors, and it's the nice Apple Thunderbolt monitors with a built-in really good camera, so that helps a lot. We'll provide headsets, things like that. So we kind of provide the tooling and then say, you're the employee, you guys make it work, and we haven't really had any problems with that. I think we probably have time for one more, right, Mark? Or I do a couple more? Anybody? Yeah. That's a good question. The question is, when you don't know people well, face to face, but you have to criticize their code or the way they work or things like that. I think that's partly a question for me as a director, but in case y'all didn't have any questions, I kind of primed them with stuff to talk about. Daniel actually just last year had the experience of joining the team, or joining Living Social as a remote employee, not knowing anybody, and kind of having to onboard and get to know his team and work with them all from home. So I'll let Daniel talk to that a little bit.
Sure. If at all possible, I think it's absolutely essential that you have some face-to-face time, even if you're being hired as a purely remote employee. Living Social is able to get me in front of people, and with my team in DC for about a week, and I get back there, once every month and a half to 2 months. So if you can manage that, and at least some small quantity, that seriously helps the, not only being in a place to help constructively criticize each other's work, but also not to kind of to understand that when you're working remotely and you don't have a persistent, video chat going on or some kind of persistent back channel. When you talk to folks, it's usually about business or when they have things to complain to you about. And if you don't have any of that personal rapport, it becomes a constant feed of negativity or just work. And so I know that Glenn mentioned we have like an off-topic channel in our campfire rooms that you can just talk about anything. People post GIFs and YouTube clips, and so if you can't meet in person, making sure that you have that kind of that water cooler, digital water cooler space that you can relate on a human level with people is absolutely essential. It's not feeling like you are constantly getting the negative side of things. That'd be my. If we can meet in person, it's a serious win.
Daniel just mentioned travel, and that's something I forgot to mention when I was talking about being flexible as a remote employee. You have this wonderful thing where you have no commute anymore, and you get to work in your pajamas when you want to, and all this great stuff. And even if you don't like traveling very much, it can be really important every 6 weeks to 2 months, maybe even a little less often, to travel and be together with your team. And that's part of the flexibility. I know that Chris Morris doesn't like to travel at all. He works for our team from Denton, but at the same time, he understands that, hey, I get to work from my easy chair, so I'll do the travel and complain a little bit, but it's part of the trade-off. And real quickly, before I get to your last question, part of that question was about giving criticism. And so, not that that's by any means the biggest part of my role as a manager, thankfully, but, it's something that I sometimes have to do. And part of the way that we've made having remote directors and remote managers work well is regularly scheduled, fairly frequent one-on-ones. I try to have a 30-minute one-on-one meeting with everybody that reports directly to me once every 2 weeks, and then everybody below that who doesn't report directly to me but is still on my team once every 4 weeks. They typically are, 5 minutes of, hey, what can I do for you? I've got this problem and blah, 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 and then talking about what you did last weekend, what your hobbies were. It's a getting to know you time, making sure that I know what's going on with them to the extent they're willing to share, of course, not just at work, but also in their lives. And getting to know them like that way is important for us to be able to have frank discussions. Okay, so one last question. Well, what would I say to Marissa Meyer at Yahoo, who came in and just stopped all the remote work? I'm a big believer that context is everything, and so I wouldn't make any blanket pronouncements to her. I was shocked by that. I thought it was kind of unwise, especially in a job market, that's kind of competitive. When you give people wonderful things and let them get used to those things, it doesn't sit well to have them taken away, and that's just human nature. And but Yahoo was kind of in a bad spot, and maybe they needed something to really shake people up and know how serious it was. So, like I said, I'm sure there's context there I'm not aware of. I wouldn't have done that, but then I work from home, so. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks especially to Daniel and Nick and Sarah. It worked out great. I was afraid this would fail terribly, but that was really terrific. Thanks for being willing to do that, and especially to get up early in Sarah's case. I'm sorry I said you lived in Portland. Thanks everyone. It was great talking to you.